see you. In today's episode, I speak with Dr. Dell Ducharme, a Canadian psychologist, consultant, and national trainer in brainspotting. Dr. Ducharme shares his journey to the field of psychology and trauma work, emphasizing the role of curiosity and connection in healing. We explore the differences between EMDR and brainspotting, uncovering what makes each approach unique in trauma therapy. Our conversation also touches on the concept of self-location within therapy. Dell reflects on the importance of cultural sensitivity, advocating for community-driven change, and shaping the future of healing in Canada. Welcome to Brain Juice. Dell, it's so good to see you. I'm very excited about our talk today. So you are a skilled psychologist, a brain spotting trainer, and you have this wealth of expertise in the world of trauma. And before we kind of go deeper into our conversation, I really ultimately want to kind of get a taste of what got you on this path and why did you become a clinical psychologist? At what age did you first discover a joy for psychology? What led you down this path of specializing in the world of trauma, EMDR, brain spotting, and cross-cultural work that you're so deeply involved in?
Nice to be here, Mitch. Thank you. All of it has been accidental. My temperament has always been one of curiosity, and I really enjoy people, and I like solving problems. So my mom's dream and somewhat her push was for me to become a criminal lawyer. And that was the path I thought I was going to take. And then in grade 10, I went to Miles Mack Collegiate here in Winnipeg, and Jack Stewart, who I later found was a friend of my family, he taught the first psychology course in the public school system in Manitoba, and I was fortunate enough to take it. And when I took it, I thought, I can't be a lawyer. And what I realized is that being a lawyer and being a psychologist have some similarities. Primarily, they're both highly analytic and problem solving. But I thought, I just would rather spend my time being with people and learning about human behavior. Though what ended up happening is when I finally graduated, my dream was not necessarily to be clinical. I wanted to teach and do research at the university. Unfortunately, at the time in 1989, 1992, the University of Manitoba put a moratorium on hiring males, because at that time it was considered an old boys club. So I was said, for the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years, there will be no hiring of males in the department. And at the time I was married and starting to have children. And my wife and I, we both had good jobs. And we thought, leaving Manitoba to go to a place we're not really maybe comfortable with and having children wouldn't be in the picture. So I did some grief and loss work for about 3 weeks. And then I decided, I'll do clinical work. So that's how that happened. In terms of trauma, when I graduated in 1995, was working long-term at a organization servicing people with physical and cognitive disabilities. And I'd been there for 16 years. And one of my dear friends, Louis Soren, who is Métis, and he's a knowledge keeper, was quite involved with doing work up north, and he invited me to get a hold of the federal government. At that time, Dr. McCabe was there, and they were changing their services. Rather than setting people up to have clients sign their signature and making money based on people seeing, I was given what's called the standing offer agreement, which was just an open field to work with community. So it was kind of like your own salary. So I started to go up north, and that was quite exciting. That goes back 1997, and I've been going up north ever since.
Tell me what's kind of going through your head as you're kind of embarking on these trips up north as a new psychologist.
Well, it's highly personal because growing up, my dad is First Nation, Métis, and my mom is of Jewish ancestry, and they both were very embarrassed and ashamed. And we were never really told about it, although we lived it. So when I finally started getting my roots on the First Nation side, because mom never disclosed her Jewish ancestry until I was well in my early 50s. Um, I was nervous because my dad did not necessarily hold a strong, well, he didn't have strong encouragement to get involved. And my mom was afraid because my dad's family, they were a little bit rough and tough and drinkers. My mom's an anxious sort. So we didn't get to see my dad's family a lot. But you could feel through the attunement of the general feelings that my mom had, which was fear. So I remember going up to St. Teresa Point and getting off the plane and being so scared. I was actually scared for my safety, which is so bizarre. And then when I met Hazel and Chris Harper, it was an immediate bond. And they took me in and they really taught me a lot, and we still connect to this day.
And I'm curious around your formal teachings through your clinical training. How did that prepare you or not prepare you for what was to become your experiences?
Well, I mean, it didn't train me for cross cultural work, and it didn't uh, at all train me for colonization and trauma. What it did offer, and I'm quite happy with it, was a solid base in understanding human behavior, psychopathology, and some of the underlying principles of behavior. My mentor, or my advisor, Dr. Holborn, he was split between a clinical and a behaviorist. So at the U of M at that time, we did have a clinical behavioral stream, and I was fortunate enough to get into it. But where he really influenced me was on being focused not on technique, not on strategy, not on theory, but on principles. He says, if I give you a wrench and you don't understand the principle of using a wrench, you won't know what's going wrong. But if you know the principles, and the principles are tied to a strategy or technique, you will have a better understanding of what that technique should be used for, how it should be applied, and what the outcome should be. And if there's any problems, you go back to the principal to figure out what's going on. So that really, I would say, directed a lot of my career of doing a lot of reading and trainings with learning principles and neurobiology. So there, I mean, it really supported me in learning different techniques and trying to understand what they're useful for and where they may or may not work.
And you've developed an expertise into trauma. So I'm kind of curious a little bit about your journey when it comes to learning different principles when it comes to supporting people that may have experienced trauma.
Well, I had no fear of it. And I've never had fear of people getting highly activated. I just kind of always felt we're in this together. And if we care enough and we collaborate, and I always felt anybody I worked with was as smart as I was, we would get through it. Over time, though, I realized how dumb I was in terms of intervention. And learning what we learned at university and as an intern, it's only entry, not really taught about trauma. And trauma is so misunderstood. And I would say working with First Nation, you're dealing with the complex trauma. And really much of their culture is embedded in trauma. So when I would go up, because I would go to 5 or 6 communities 2 days at a time, and the trauma was just overflowing. And I would do fancy dancy talking. I would do some systematic desensitization, and I felt all I was doing was opening up doors and traumatizing people with little impact. So surreptitiously, I used to go up to Thompson and work with workers' comp, and we have a nickel mine. And some of those big boys got into big accidents, being ripped through machines, being rolled on by machinery, really serious. And I was seeing this one fellow that I had worked with, and because I had a behavioral background, I was using systematic desensitization. He was having a minimum of 5 to 8 flashbacks every minute. He lived in flashback. So we got them down to 5 from about 8. And then I was so proud. And then one Friday I showed up and he's looking different. And he has a big smile and he hands me this card. And he says, I look at it, it says Roger Solomon, Dr. Solomon, EMDR. So I don't know if you know Roger, but he's very well known in the EMDR world, very well known. And he says, well, my workplace safety sent me there. the nurse sent me there. And I went to Toronto, and he was there working with other people. And him and his assistant worked on me for 3 days, 2 3-hour sessions. And my flashbacks are down to 1 or less a minute. I'm feeling good. And then he nicely said, Roger wants you to have his card, but he does want you to know you're doing a really good job, but you may want to follow up on EMDR.
Wow.
I
So,
know.
was this the first time you're hearing of EMDR?
I never heard of it. So then I go back to work, and I was working at a hospital then part time. And I go into our lunchroom. And what's up there, Mitch? A bloody poster for EMDR training in Winnipeg at the All Know Center. So I thought, so I took it. And there's some funny antidotes, but I won't spend time on it. But I learned it during the training, and I thought it was weird. But then as I went through those 3 days, what I worked on very quickly, and things that had a large impact on me. It's not that they had disappeared, but they were well attenuated. So I was so excited, I went up north and I started using EMDR with everybody that I knew.
Curious for the listeners, what is EMDR and what is brain spotting?
They have some commonalities. They're both, we would say, midbrain therapies. And for me, they're based on the natural phenomenon related to a survival mechanism, where we're dealing with orienting responses, relevant eye, reflexive responses. But they do have different mechanisms because they use different approaches or frames or protocols. So both, however, they were both discovered. They were not invented. Francine discovered hers during her famous walk in the park, where she came back, had processed something, and realized it may had had to do something with eye movement. And then she worked with other students and perfected it. David discovered it during his famous therapy session with the skater, and using at that time what he called EMDR natural flow, and going slow and noticing a reflexive eye movement. So they're both discoveries and natural phenomenon, but they're set up differently. EMDR is set up as a protocol. And what Francine did is she based a lot of things off the adaptive information processing model, AIP, which I think it goes for brain spotting too. And that's our brains are naturally develop and are geared to process information in an adaptive way. In other words, bring in, figure it out, throw out what you don't need, keep what you need. But every so often, for whatever reason, things get stuck. And her belief was, when it came to at least trauma, that bits or fragments of information are stored in the midbrain in an unprocessed form. And she found by using eye movements that you're able to actually get in there and open doors to that information. So she corralled an approach, and she developed an 8-phase approach. And the first phase is to do with history taking, proper preparation, resource safety, assessing. And what assessing means is, what is the event and what is the most critical part of that event that activates you? What is the negative belief you have about yourself with that event? Would be, I'm going to die, but they still feel it. What would you like to believe are positive? Well, I'm going to live. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being it doesn't feel at all true and 7 very true. And you say, with this event, watching what happened, you say to yourself, I'm going to live. How true does that feel? Maybe a 2. That's put aside. We go back to the event. What are the emotions? Where are they in your body? And then you do a suds. Now you've set it up and you move into desensitization through the eye movements, right? The bilateral stimulation, which creates a REM phenomenon. And we know with REM, all aspects of your brain are lit up. So it means whatever's stored there can come out. A lot of connections happening. And through that, there's kind of reciprocal inhibition that goes on of the distraction, the calming, and the fear all combined together, which results in the collapsing of the activation. Then what happens, she then will go back to the body, see where things are in the body. And then she will hopefully say, well, how strong do things feel now? You're hoping it gets down to a 2 or less, and they'll install that. And then they go back to the positive belief. Now that you've done this hard work, so this is installation. Tell me on a scale of 1 to 7, when you think about that event, how true does it feel I'm going to be safe? Feels like a 7. And then you install that. Okay. And they also do some future forward saying, so given all the hard work you've done today and this past event behind you and knowing you're going to be safe, I wonder how tomorrow, next week, next month may be. And you do that. Okay. Then the session is closed. And then you do a follow-up. So those are the 8 phases. David sets it up as a frame, and he has different eye positions that he uses to construct the frame. He has the outside window where the person doesn't quite know what the hell you're doing, but you're looking for reflexive responses. He's got the inside window where it's collaborative. It's a lot of fun. Then you get the big resource models. And what I find, I've always found it's interesting. When I started learning brain spotting, I've said this to David, I feel by nature brain spotting is a resource model. Because why did David find spotting last? Because that's what we normally do. Well, the reason David found gaze spotting last is because he found through the outside window, through the EMDR, what happened. And then, like any good therapist, at one point a person said, David, can you move it over there? Hence the creation of inside window. And then sometimes when David was talking, he got the sense of eye movement and gaze, and he went, that person's looking over there. I'm going to go with that. So it's interesting as a phenomenon. What David discovered kind of last up front was the natural phenomenon of eye gaze in relevant eye position. So where EMDR works on reciprocating bilateral stimulation. See, you're not doing this, you're doing this. That creates the REM movement. David sets a frame where the person finds the spot and sits with it. And you allow the person to be with it as long as they can. With EMDR, every 20 to 40 seconds, maybe 60, you'll say, what are you noticing? And I think I was sharing with you earlier is one of the challenges with that approach, especially with people who normally go into panic, is you are throwing them into states of panic because they're going in and out of deep brain processing and bringing them into thought and taking them back. And that can be really dysregulating, which can cause panic. And that's, the reason I think EMDR has gone so big into resourcing. And I'm less into resourcing in terms of creating something versus using something that's already a lived experience and capitalizing on. So that's kind of the lowdown on a little bit of difference between brain spotting and EMDR.
Would there be a rationale with picking one over the other?
I just want to tell you how I discovered brain spotting.
Yeah, please.
I went to Toronto for an EMD conference, and Jim Litsky, who's really well known in Canada, him and his wife lived in Ontario, close to Toronto. They would do the book selling. And I had every EMDR book in the world. And I'm looking, I see this really kind of neat looking book, and it says brain spotting, treatment at warp speed. I said, Jim, what is this? He says, I don't know. I've had that book kind of bouncing around for a year or two. I have no idea. And I thought, I'm going to buy this. And then on the plane home, as I was reading it, I went, oh my gosh, I didn't know David. I said, oh my gosh, this makes a lot of sense. And if you remember, David discovered it while he was doing EMDR naturals. And I think it's important to remind people that neither Francine nor David invented. They discovered natural phenomena related to the eyes. What EMDR really does, it creates a rapid eye movement, REM, very well. And we know under REM conditions, that's when you're sleeping, you are living in technicolor. All the parts of the brain are lit up, and that allows for good exposure. Brain spotting does it too, but less so, I find. So with brain spotting, I think phenomenologically attends to the AIP model, but I think it enters differently. It's not protocol. I believe there's greater pull towards relational and neurobiological attunement. It's not interruptive. So David kind of uses his frames not that much different than the protocols that Francine did to a certain extent, where he looks at what the event is, what the issue is. What is the activation, where in your body? He doesn't go into the beliefs, but how are you feeling? Right? And then the way you go and you start processing. So there's a similar flow. But whereas EMDR is like a skater on ice skating and then goes through the ice and pops up and starts processing again and then pops down and comes back up. Brain spotting is more like a horse-drawn elevator where there's the big ropes tied to the horses to the elevator and they slowly go down, and over time the elevator goes slower and slower into the shaft. So I think brain spotting generally does a better job around deeper processing and reprocessing because you're not interrupting the process.
So, what is the relationship around attunement and relationship when it comes to healing from trauma?
Well, if we go back to being human, it's all about connection. We are human animals. Attachment with the care provider that offers us an opportunity or a platform for survival. And once the general survival is being taken care of, it's a platform for growth, learning, and independence. So we are wired to connect. Connection offers a sense of safety, but it also promotes growth, development. So if we go back to the research in the 70s and 80s, Mitch, and I don't think it's changed, there's always been one factor that has always contributed to success: the therapeutic relationship.
And I recently heard you use kind of a way of approaching work, which is with care and curiosity and patience and persistence, CCPP. And curious if you want to expand a little bit about those thoughts.
Those are the ingredients to attachment. So if we go back, and we'll get into it a lot right now, but Yank Panksepp discovered seven subcortical emotions that are in the lower brain. All primates have these centers. There's seven of them. One is caring, one is curiosity or seeking, right? The other one is play, lust, fear, panic, and rage. When an infant cries, I don't know about you, they sound like they're in panic and rage. They're not saying, "Hey, Ma, get that bottle over here. Dad, my diaper's wet." They're screaming like they're dying. We are wired to respond to that. When you're in a store, right? Whether it's Walmart or Sobeys or wherever, and somebody screams or a child, especially a child, it's so common everybody head orients towards the screen. That's protection. So I would say these things are part and parcel of attachment. So if we didn't care for an infant and gave birth and walked away, that infant wouldn't live. So wired in us is a care response. So, and this also goes to polyvagal theory, but when a baby cries, the best dance of attachment is this. The parent cares for the child and will go and will seek out what's going on. Then curiosity kicks in. Are they wet? Tired? Are they scared? Are they cold? And then they may pick up the baby and touch and not cold, check the diaper, not wet. So now they're showing patience and figuring out what's going on. And they're persistent till they find it. Pat, 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 burp, gas. It's through that ongoing dance of care and curiosity, patience, and persistence that a child not only survives, they develop an eternal sense of safety and protection because they have this amazing person doting on them 24/7. They have a wonderful young narcissistic sense of self and importance, that I'm important. And then there's as their brain develops and their motor skills start to excel, we transfer skills to them. Can you take that to the garbage? Come on, you can get up here. You can do it. What do you want to wear? So we end up over time teaching day-to-day living skills. And the child then begins to master these, and they develop a good sense of confidence and the sense of self-efficacy. But most important, as they do that within the circle of connection and love, they develop a heck of a sense of identity, that I'm important. And then, of course, they become teenagers and nobody's important but them, but we kind of work that through over time. So it's through that ongoing dance, where we're driven by our brain to care. But then care, curiosity, patience, and persistence is the grease that supports development, identity, a sense of self-efficacy.
I can totally see how those four key ingredients in the caregiver to child relationship help develop a sense of safety in the world. So, those kind of core values of curiosity, which probably leads to growth and discovery, and care, which helps with developing their own identity and self confidence,
Yeah.
patience and persistence, the key ingredients when it comes to facing adversity and being able to learn in this tricky world.
Well, and they use the word repair. If I go and I change my child's diaper and it works, I'm repairing a breach in their activation system. It's a repair. I don't know if I like that word, but I understand it. So through repetitive experiences of repair, that also builds resilience. Things can be repaired. I know it feels like you're going to die when they have a little bit of blood. They're screaming like they're going to die. But of course they are. Why would a child not scream like they're going to die? That's what their body's saying. But it's us calming them through that relational attunement, that care, which again I think brain spotting is very powerful with that presence.
So within brain spotting, you do notice that there is a general kind of co-regulation between the person who may be suffering from trauma as well as the therapist themselves and using that relationship to help reprocess those very difficult experiences.
Well, and of all the techniques that I use, and I use a lot, I find a 20 to 40 minute of brain spotting. I just feel the strongest attunement with the client where I think I'm feeling what they're feeling.
Hmm.
I can feel the waves and then I can see things. I can see the eyes. And when I've watched, when Elsa and I do our training and she's doing a demo and I'm looking really hard, I'm not always picking up what she's picking up. But then when I'm doing it, I'm picking up things that I don't think I would have seen if she was doing it. So there is attunement happening at a very deep level.
But it's interesting, even as I listen to you from the beginning of our conversation today, this idea that you do value the importance of not being afraid to actually do the work, right? And getting through the work. And it sounds like for you, that's kind of, you've been able to stay within your own window of tolerance because you're very hopeful and optimistic that you're going to be able to get through the work.
I also, I'm part of the wolf clan, which I wanted to be an eagle, but I'm a wolf. And wolf is humility. And that's true because I'm somebody who always walks the middle line. I don't believe one thing's better than another or one thing contributes more to the other. They're equally important. And we need to be curious and welcoming to it.
Now, I still have this image of kind of the horse drawn carriage or elevator kind of just going down and going down and going down. And you've been a strong advocate around midbrain therapies. You've talked about subcortical intervention. What are some of the common misconceptions or things that you think people should better consider when it comes to some of these approaches?
Well, the misconceptions are about greed and politics. Like, what is there to misconceive when you think about it? We have cognitive behavior therapy, and we know that we have cognitive distortions. My belief on cognitive distortions, if you look at them, Mitch, and you put the age of 5 to 10 on them, all kids have them. These do not develop in adulthood. These are just not developed ways of thinking. That's all. They haven't developed out of it. But it works. Sitting down and offering a beautiful smile and a sense of care works. DBT works. So if we were to look at all the different therapies, starting from the top brain, it's all relational, let's say, but most midbrain, you've got verbal psychotherapy, right? You go down, you've got cognitive behavior therapy. Keep moving down, you've got DBT, EFT, somatic experiencing, deep brain reorientation. You've got brain spotting, EMDR, and I would put probably deep brain reorienting below that. So you look at them all. They all have a purpose. It depends on what the person needs. Most people do well without going to a therapist. Most people in the world will get through things without ever experiencing brain spotting or EMDR. That gives us a sense of structure and safety. And so when you ask that question, I would say they're all good. They all do different things for different reasons. And what makes a good therapist is somebody who can assess and know where a person is at a given time and apply what they need. I love brain spotting. I'm always going to be a brain spotter. I do it all the time. I like EMDR. And for those that are extremely activated, I go to EMDR 2.0 because I can do 2 or 3 criteria in an hour. I could not do that with brain spotting. There's no way. But I prefer brain spotting. I really do.
Fair. I'm kind of curious about the work you've been doing with First Nations and cross cultural populations. And I'm curious around your experience, perhaps even challenges when trying to apply Western modalities like EMDR and brain spotting in these contexts. And what have you discovered along the way?
Well, not to be cheeky with you, but what does Western modality mean? I'm asking the podcaster. What does that mean?
Well, that's a good question. I think you've talked about kind of the colonization of knowledge, right? So, from a westernizer kind of approach, I would say these are probably the approaches that are taught in our systems and institutions like universities. And probably also those, like you said, are probably marketed and branded and protected as being, part of the evidence based approaches.
Are you talking EB and GS?
That's that.
Evidence based gold standard?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So
that's, well, I guess that's kind of what I am curious in the sense of, okay, you know, there is kind of, when it comes to these approaches, this impression of I'm an expert, I've been trained in these ways, and that may not be necessarily the best way to move forward. So, yeah,
well,
I guess that's
I,
what I'm
I
curious about, kind of you landing for the very first time, and again, what teachings you've actually discovered along the way.
I don't land on Western nomenclature. I don't. I just do not like it. It's rude. It's bullying. If we go first, I'll answer it in two ways. If we go back to my advisor, his response was, Dell, please don't get bamboozled by a technique. And I thought, Steve, why are principles so important? Response is, not to deflate your balloon, but, you're made out of everything that exists in the universe. You're not special, not at all. And by the way, genetic wise, we're not that far off from being a dog. We're all the same. We're all the same. So my response to this would be, I don't really give a damn about a technique. I care about, is it congruent with the natures of the laws of nature? And do they share fundamental principles that we find in the universe? There are four truisms in my life that I go by for all treatment. The first one, and this has nothing to do with creation or evolution, survival. Second, decrease pain. Third, increase pleasure. Four, conserve energy. Everything floats around that, and that's how our biology is. And then it's up to how that mixes with the environment and our care providers and how we potentiate. We're all the same. Now, we know every seed of an oak tree is different. Some are going to be bigger than others, even if they enjoy the same environment. But constitutionally, they're the same family, and we are too. So what I do, why I got excited, why I got excited about brain spotting, something clicked in my head that didn't click with EMDR. Oh my goodness, David, you have discovered something. And I thought, holy cow, Francine discovered something. They have both discovered a natural phenomenon. So whether we want to say it's Western or Eastern or tradition, to me, it's whoever discovers it. And First Nation people do not take ownership. I would never say da da da. I'd say when Mitch shared this, when the elder shared this, nobody owns knowledge. Nobody owns it. It is not capitalized on. It is a shared treasure. So for me, if you don't own it, you don't get political about it. It's more curious and you respect and honor it. So I don't think Western. Somebody comes up with something, whatever it is, I'm going directly to, I wonder what principles this is capitalizing on.
And in your work on northern communities or underserved communities, you find brain spotting and EMDR have been well received?
What I
Or
found when I,
how do you adapt
yeah.
your approach?
Well, no. Okay. See, that's the whole thing though. Why would you adapt? Adapt what? Why would I adapt a piece of cheese? But there are things, you're right, that are done different. But I'm making a point is that okay, can I give you an example in brain spotting? Brain spotting, when I saw David do it, I was like a 5-year-old boy running to a candy shop, but I think about it, it was really embarrassing because I thought this is traditional. It's about connection. It's about respecting what is. It's about supporting the subjectivity that exists with the intrasubjectivity, but the intersubjectivity is it's about connection. It's about allowing the person to find their own way. And David doesn't say he's the pilot of the comet. He's got a friggin' back seat next to the toilet that's overflowing. So my sense with brain spotting, it's more the phenomena is natural as it is in EMDR, but the approach is more relational and more around connectivity between the therapist, the client, and what's around. I mean, I can only talk about my own experience. There's a greater sense of connectedness. So I find brain spotting beautiful that way because it's not protocol based. It becomes part of your own perception. It becomes part of your own style and who you are. It reflects who you are. And I know, I mean, you've seen many trainers, Mitch, and you're an expert at watching trainers and you see the different styles. Yeah. And brain spotting allows that. You're not constrained. So so this is how I've made brain spotting or how I've supported brain spotting is that no one First Nation person is like all First Nation persons. Some are Christians. Some think they're Christians, but they're not. Some don't know what they are. Other are traditional. But what Alison and I have done, we've come up with frames and they're based on First Nation customs and beliefs. There's the narrative frame because narrative is a very important part of the culture. They are oral. It's amazing, even now in the communities, 8-year-olds can get up and talk better than I can. They're orators and they tell stories and everybody listens. So the narrative frame is when somebody's kind of starting out in their healing journey and they're trying to make sense of who they are and what their journey is like, which we'll talk about self-location. So they will come up with kind of a narrative and they will, with that, what that narrative, what image comes with that narrative where they are, and we'll work off that to help them begin to develop a more broad and deeper narrative. There's the 7 grandfather teachings, and they are resources. So somebody may come with a big issue, and they need to be resourced by a teaching. And often a teaching is related to an animal spirit, right? And as we're doing these, we're also paying very close attention to direction, where the person sits. We also have another resource frame. In First Nation culture, the person is in the center. It's really quite interesting. And then they're surrounded by the sacred and grandfather teachings. Then they're encircled by family and relationships. Then they're encircled by community values and resources. So what we do is we have them come up with what is ever really concerning them. And we do work prior to the frame where they will come up with where they are and where they are within the teachings and their community. So they feel not alone and they can invite in grandmothers and grandfathers. And then with that, they begin to process off the spot. Usually there's a lot of different spots, right? So there's many frames that encompass beliefs, teachings, and traditions. Now, are we adapting brain spotting? No, we're adapting the frame. And what's magical about the frame is a state where our neurology, our body, our thinking, and our motor, everything, whatever we need to undertake the task set before us, that sets the frame. So if I'm going to play baseball, I'm going to start thinking about baseball, going to limber up, right? If I'm going to go give a talk, I've got to get my body in a state where I can think clearly. I'm going to be relaxed. I'm going to smile. So the frame is a state that incorporates all aspects of our body that permit us to successfully undertake what's in front of us. We are state changing all the time. You state change when you leave work and get in your car. Then you state change when you leave your car and go into the house. You state change when you start cooking supper. It's putting yourself in a state that allows us to meet the demands. Why is it with people with severe trauma cannot do things? Why are they so disorganized? They cannot get in a state. They're panicky. That goes back to that 7 subcortical piece. They're on panic mode, not necessarily fear. They're on panic. Panic causes disorganization. Fear doesn't necessarily. And I see borderline personality disorder more of a trauma and with very unfortunate features of uncontrolled panic. I see more as a panic disorder. in some ways, interwoven into some very unfortunate ways of thinking and feeling.
And you also refer to this notion of self-location, and you're one of the Canadian brain spotting trainers, and you've got an upcoming talk with the Brain Spotting Canada Association on the notion of self-location within brain spotting. So give us a little bit of a peek. When we mean self-location, what do we actually mean?
Well, self-location is not a new term, Mitch. It has been embedded in feminism and decolonization. It's around finding your spot in who you are based on what's happened to you, right? I'm self-located here because of look at all the crap that's happened to me. That's how I got here. And they've used that to begin to champion, change. It can have different meanings based on the context. A philosophical context, self-location is my identity pertaining to relationships, social structure, and physical presence. From a cognitive point of view, it's my awareness of where I am in space and time. How I use it, it is our subjective self. Who am I? I am who I am based on who I'm or what I'm connected. And we're connected to the universe, which goes from the creation of the Big Bang, the past, our past generations, and we're learning about how things are passed along through genetics, epigenetics. We're the result of what brought me here, what I am right now, but I'm also located where I'm going to be. And if we look at things, I find brain spotting talks about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. I only believe in it partway. There is so much certainty if we go back to the laws of nature and cycles. If we look at birth, women don't go to 18, 20 months. They're 40 weeks. I don't know about you. Talking. We need some words around one. Walking. Let's get up and stand and hold on to things and walk by one. So we have through, Piaget and Kohlberg and other people have learned stages of development. They're phenomenological. Explain what we see. I don't need research to tell me that what I'm seeing is worth seeing. That's a bunch of crap. Like, am I that paranoid that I can't believe things that I see? Like, really? And does it matter? So what happens with the whole concept of self-location and the principle of uncertainty is that if we mapped out this beautiful landscape and we say somebody's born in 1950 and died in 2020, we could kind of say when they would be doing things, when they might be experiencing things based on their abilities and socioeconomic status. That I don't care. At 30, things hurt a little bit more. And they hurt a lot more at 50. And at 66, not that I know anybody that age, there's a lot of gas and pain. So there is certainty. Things are born, things die. There's spring, summer, winter, fall. 99.9% of all living organisms known to man and woman have died. What does that say? Rebirth? Death. A pattern of development. There's certainty in that. However, there's certainty in the constitution of water. And let's say I'm looking at a hill and it goes down nicely. Rocks, bushes, mud. If I pour water on it, based on how water is constituted, gravity in the earth, it's going to run down. However, when you're flying over Winnipeg and you're looking at the friggin' Red River, and it's meandering, like, can you go in a straight line? It went where there was forces of least resistance, but it still moved. So I think there's a lot of certainty. And when people come to see me, we spend a lot of time with history, assessment, preparation. And I'll talk about this at the talk of how I map out their landscape and what we would and wouldn't expect or anticipate. Where I buy 100% into the uncertainty is when the comet gets going. There is no idea how that's going to be processed. I agree with that. But other things, I know you're going to need to eat. I know you're going to need to sleep. And if you don't sleep, I know what's going to happen to you. I know what's going to happen to you if your child got sick. So I believe there's a lot of certainty based on principles and laws. But the uncertainty comes with how the hell do we process this and work it through personally? That's so subjective. And brain spotting does a wonderful job of it.
So I'm getting excited. What made you want to further explore kind of this notion?
I'm curious. When I was 4 years old, 5 years old, I think I told this during a training. I was sitting on the bus with my mom, and there was an older fellow in front of us, whatever old meant. And mom was talking about dogs. And I said, Mom, why do dogs have fur? Well, keep them warm. But why do dogs have longer fur and dogs have shorter fur? Is it because they're colder? It's just who they are. Why do birds fly? On and on and on. My mom was getting annoyed. And then I was empowered. The guy turned around and said to my mom, you are so fortunate to have such a curious young man. I'm just curious to know anything.
So in a
So,
sense, this talk has been decades in the work, is what you're trying to say.
yes. So, but what started to happen though, Mitch, to be fair to your question, is that I began to realize it just all of a sudden as I like it's been like a Frankenstein, that I learned some basic stuff in grad school. I got experience. See, where I've been really fortunate, I have lived an amazing work because when I went to university, I was able to do clinical and behavioral. I had a mentor who was principle driven. He liked laws of nature. Work, I worked at the Society for Manitobans with Disabilities, birth to death, people with all these diagnoses. I loved it. There was so much to learn, so much that I was taught. I had to rearrange how testing was done. I had people who had cerebral palsy, athetoid, and those who have athetoid have usually no speech, very little control over their bodies, but they got a brain. My supervisor said, okay, Dell, figure out how to test them. I got the nonverbal stuff. I made it bigger. I got a head pointer. And she laughed. She says, no, 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 no. I had the OT bring in a powered wheelchair. I'm going to put her in it. She got in the chair, took off. She said, that's how you test. You tell me if you could do it that quick, Dell. But she says, you do have to test. But again, it's like expanding how you look at things. And then I also my second language is American Sign Language. So this was really my first hurrah cross-culturally. And the deaf population, they're wonderful and they love me and they adopted me. I learned so much about other cultures. And then going up north and then also being with a Jewish partner for a while. So I've had opportunity to see so many different ways that people look at the world and they all seem amazing and one's not better than another. I always want to know. See, that's why I'm terrible in conversations. I am. People are saying something, get to the point. Get to the point. How are those four things the same? I go down to what I think is the common point. That's what I want to know. So it's looking at it's comparing and contrasting. What diverges and converges. I'm always looking for convergence.
And what are you hoping that participants are going to get out of this talk?
What I'm hoping is that they will feel good about what they do, that they will be excited about curiosity, that they will be hungry for connection, and just simply feel safe with each other, that we're all in this together. And whatever we learn, let's just share it. Nobody owns it.
Well, I'm excited, and I hope that others are going to attend as well. As we kind of wrap up, I'm curious around your thoughts, your aspirations, and where do you see the world of healing, of trauma in the context of our landscape here in Canada?
That's a really hard one. I think if there's going to be change with it, let's talk First Nation community, is that change is only going to happen from within. It will never happen from without. The government from day one have wanted to eradicate this population and they don't care. They don't. So what I'm hoping more is that they engage in self-location, that they decide where they've come from and where they want to go. Is that in our work with First Nation, there's three things that we do. One is relationship, that we engage in a relationship that we understand, that we come and we visit, we interact, and that we're honest, that we don't offer anything we can't really give. And we shouldn't be offering anyway. People should be asking. Kind of like when there was all the people who were, brought to Winnipeg because of the fires. We as therapists could think of all the things they needed. But when they were asked, they told us things we never thought of. We need to have relevance. Relevance is based on validity and personal worth. What is valid is wisdom, because wisdom is known and passed along. We need to understand their wisdom. And whatever we do has to be relevant to them. Does it make a difference in their life? Right. And, the other one, I'm just going to look because I want to make sure I say it right, is to have kind of mindful intervention. This one is hard because when I go into a community, I can go in as the all knowing therapist. But maybe what somebody needs is somebody who can walk with them, who has a therapeutic sense. Maybe what they need is for me to deliver some milk. But when I do that, how do I make that therapeutic? If I'm seeing somebody in therapy, how do I support them that when they leave, they're going to be better off? Any intervention I have should hopefully respect the person's self-location, which involves the people around them, that it's relevant to their life and the relationship is an honest one. So I would say, as we move forward as Western therapists, I think we need to have relationships, mindfully intervene, and what we do needs to be relevant. And we'll only get that by having relationships with First Nation and letting them steer their own course.
Dell, thank you for spending time with me. I have a final fun question. At least it's fun for me. But I am curious. If you were to travel in time and revisit yourself as a younger self, what kind of advice would you give to yourself?
Don't be so freaking anxious. I grew up with trauma and it was hard. I was quite anxious and had trouble. I mean, I was very friendly, quite popular, but I was really anxious to enjoy and truly connect just for fun. There always seemed to be hypervigilance. So I would have probably said to myself, you know what? Things are going to be good. And maybe one day on October 2nd in 2025, you're going to be talking to this really nice young man about things that you do, and he's showing interest. It's going to be okay. I think that's what I would have said. It's going to be okay.
Thank you so much for all the work you do. You're making change at every level, whether it's with policymakers, frontline, with therapists, with patients, and even in the academic world. So hats off to you, my friend. And I'm going to wish you the very best with your upcoming talk.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity and for your very interesting questions, insightful questions.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Dell Ducharme. Here are a few takeaways I had while I was listening back to my conversation with him. First, understanding people comes before mastering techniques. Dell reminded us that curiosity and intuition are powerful tools in supporting others, especially those who've lived through significant trauma. Second, physiological activation matters. Healing happens not just through words, but through the body. Creating safety and connection within a therapeutic relationship and setting the frame set the stage for meaningful trauma processing. Third, therapy must meet people where they are. Culturally sensitive care requires curiosity, compassion, patience, and persistence. Four pillars Dell highlighted as essential for relevance and impact. Fourth, self-location helps us understand who we are, how our body, environment, and experiences shape our sense of self across past, present, and future. I also loved how Dell's reflection on the 4 levels of survival instincts came up: self-preservation, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, and conserving energy, all core drivers that shape how humans move through life. And finally, the future of healing in Canada depends on community-driven change, where knowledge is shared, not owned. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you'd like to support Brain Juice in future episodes like this one, please like, subscribe, and share. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.